Andrew Wilson, let me start with you, because I've got three sons, 31, 27, 24. I think I brought them up to respect women, to not behave in a misogynist way, and to behave in a pretty decent way generally. But I'm also aware that they've grown up in an era when the likes of Andrew Tate and others have become increasingly dominant in the way that a lot of impressionable young men start to think and view women. And for all that Andrew Tate can say that is positive about getting fit and being successful and confident and so on, there's indisputably a hardcore streak of misogyny that runs through his veins, which I think has been quite damaging to young men. So I'm not all in either way here, but I can certainly see the arguments. Where do you sit?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that so I watched the show, and it just goes through a typical feminine view, right? So all of these things are always through the prism of the feminine. So young boys, they don't do well in school. They don't do well in school because it's all programmed for the feminine. Stay still, fold your hands, right? Be quiet. Boys are rambunctious. They like to beat each other up. They like to be mischievous. They like to break things. They like to do that kind of stuff. There's no outlet for them to do that stuff. Their teachers are all women, right? There's basically all masculinity is now considered toxic, basically all of it. The same women who are getting their double shot of espresso on the way over to the school they're about to teach at, they're 24 years old. Sometimes they're banging their own students, right? Hilariously enough. And then these people go out to Parliament. The same women will go to Parliament. They vote to send men off to war to stab each other in the face with bayonets. And you're concerned about toxic masculinity. It cracks me up. It's like the brutal savagery of men is a necessary precondition for society to exist. And we just kind of pretend like it's not. And this show should actually be an indictment on the feminine rather than the masculine, because basically masculinity is just punished everywhere all the time, nonstop. It's no wonder guys like Andrew Tate get so famous in these spaces. I mean, what's the alternative? The alternative is everything must be feminine, tone policing, nonsense like this. It's ridiculous.
All right, James Barr, you were laughing, but I don't think you had a joy. Crazy. What you're hearing.
No, I mean I don't think you've seen the show. Episode 2 is shot entirely in a school. I didn't see one of the female teachers drinking a double shot of espresso at all. None of the teachers were flirting with students. There were male teachers as well. I don't think you're describing the show here. I think you're describing your own insecurities or agenda.
Dumb. It's just dumb. Low tier insult here. I mean, obviously he's talking about the problems in our society. He's not talking specifically about what he saw on the show, stupid.
Yeah, so this doesn't contend with the argument. Like, do you understand that I'm making an argument, an indictment of society itself based around my ideas that I'm seeing from this show? That's what I'm actually doing. So if you could contend with the fact that male savagery is necessary for the security of a nation, and that women will indeed vote in the future in parliaments to send men off to war to stab each other in the face at 18 years old with bayonets, perhaps you can contend with that before we start, getting into, well, tone policing is actually good and toxic masculinity is actually bad. It's like, I think there needs to be a little bit more toxic masculinity, or what you consider to be toxic masculinity.
Well, great. Good for you.
Nothing.
I'm glad you think so.
Nothing.
No, I mean, I just don't need to argue with that. Because
You just stunlocked?
It's pretty bad. Crickets. This is the part where you're supposed to respond, buddy.
You got nothing?
You're making up.
You do seem unusually muted by that.
I've not said anything. I haven't literally said nothing about.
James, you were literally rendered silent.
You
had no way of responding.
I'll tell you what, you can't argue with a completely illogical argument that had, I've not made any of the
It's a logical argument. You may not agree with it.
I've not made any of the comments.
He's making a perfectly logical argument.
That you are firing at me. None of those comments are things I've said or believe in.
All right, I want to bring Tomi in, because Tomi, you've got a very interesting perspective, I think. You've talked about something different. You call it the pussification of men, which is a great phrase. I'd love you to just explain what you mean by that. But also, you're not a fan of Andrew Tate.
She's like, the guy to my right, that's the guy. To our left, to her right, that guy, yeah, that's an example of it. That's what I mean by it.
All the influence he has. So that makes you, I think, an interesting commentator in this area. So just explain, first of all, the pussification of men.
All right, Piers. Well, I think, and I can't see you all, so forgive me if I'm incorrect here, but I think I'm the only female on this panel.
Correct.
So I'm really anxious to weigh in. Okay, so I think over the last probably 10 years, there has been what I call the pussification of men. It was everything should be about your emotions and your feelings, and men were emasculated, and this whole concept of toxic masculinity warped the minds of a lot of young men. And they felt masculine, they wanted to be masculine, but society was telling them they should be softer, that it was being toxically masculine if you wanted to play sports and chop wood and go to war. And so men were so emasculated and so beat down that then there was this revolution of what was actually toxic masculinity, the Tate brothers and others, which I feel as a female that doesn't represent true masculinity. That to me represents douchebaggery. And as a woman, I want a strong man who is a protector and a provider that will go to war if need be, that will protect me, protect my family, make money. I see that as being actually masculine. That's like the man that I grew up with, my dad. But what we're seeing now is these young men who look at Andrew Tate and the Tate brothers, and they see somebody who's just quite frankly a douchebag and disrespects women. And because they've been so emasculated, they're like, oh, great, that's a manly man.
I mean, that part doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I mean, she's claiming that the pussified men are the men that are supporting Andrew Tate, but it's really the opposite. The pussified men are the ones who hate Andrew Tate.
But that's not right either. So at some point, I think we'll go back to maybe meeting in the middle here. You can be a man who has feelings and emotions, but you can also go to war and protect and defend your family. I'm hoping we can get back there. But the two extremes right now, they're confusing men, and quite frankly, they're leaving women with few choices. And that's the real tragedy here.
You see,
I mean, so she basically just wants men to behave traditionally masculine, but doesn't think that women should have to behave traditionally feminine. So she kind of like wants her cake and wants to eat it too, kind of a thing. I mean, obviously it doesn't work that way. I mean, it's just not really going to work. Expecting men to kind of get the raw deal of going and fighting off in the wars, like Andrew mentioned, and obviously, like, of course, in practice, it probably won't be that, but it'll be working all the shitty jobs while women basically don't have to deal with any of that stuff, but they also don't behave traditionally feminine. They don't want to marry the men. Most women like Tomi wouldn't marry an average man. She didn't say anything in that whole little speech about how women are supposed to behave. It's all about this is how men should behave, not how women should behave. You know, she completely ignores anything about women.
I completely agree with you, but Andrew, you were shaking your head quite vigorously. Why?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just more feminine or feminist nonsense, ultimately. And the covert feminism in society is big, especially on the conservative side. So here's what happens, right? Women need to have feminine virtues for men to be pursuing masculine virtues, for you to say things like, well, men, what I want is for men to protect me and I want men to make money. Well, that's great. What that ends up doing is it gives you a set of privilege in society. What do men get? What do men get for doing that for you? What are we getting from women for doing that? Are we getting chaste virgins on our wedding night? No, we're not getting chaste virgins on our wedding night. Are we getting women of great virtue? No, we're not getting women of great virtue. The idea of courtly love is supposed to be done for women of great virtue. Where are they? Well, they're nowhere. And so in modernity, in society, when female conservative influencers say this, it's actually a form of covert feminism. They're saying, I want privilege in society, right? But what is it women are giving to men to get it? What? What are they giving them? Tell me.
Well,
Can I please chime in here?
Yes, you can. And then James can, and I'll come to you, Sean.
No, I would love to. I love this whole thing of like, if you're a female conservative and you don't believe that men should be douchebags, that all of a sudden you're a covert feminist. Call me a feminist. I really don't give one crap one way or another, but I can tell you this. A lot of these men, these podcast hosts on the right that like to think of themselves as these big masculine men, and what am I getting out of it? I can tell you this.
There's that feminism.
All right, I believe I'm a woman of virtue, right?
Out.
I mean, how are you not a feminist, though, literally, Tomi? Like, if I found what I consider to be a liberal feminist and I brought her to you, do you think that you and her would really disagree with a whole lot regarding women and men and how they should behave in society and women's rights and stuff like that? Probably not. not. This idea that pushing back against this clown world that we live in today is somehow douchebaggery. I don't like that everybody references Andrew Tate, and I don't like him personally. I think he's just kind of a low-life grifter. He's probably right to point out that there are serious problems when it comes to men and women and dating and stuff like that. And people like Tomi are somewhat responsible for it, the kinds of things that she says. But I mean, obviously, like, I would think that there could be something in between somebody like Andrew Tate and like liberal feminism. Andrew Tate is closer to having the correct answer than you, Tomi. That's just the reality of it. Sorry if that bothers you, but it's true.
Yeah, there's the feminism. Oh, and then you're interrupting me too,
Didn't
which
take
is
long,
great. I let
did it?
you
Didn't
talk.
take
It's my
long,
turn.
did it?
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to speak
So,
over me?
yeah, I don't care
Are
if
a
you call me-
strong,
I don't
independent
really care
woman?
if you call me a
strong,
feminist.
independent woman.
Yeah. Yeah. You're actually interrupting me. I didn't interrupt you when you were spewing your bullshit. So now it's my turn. Okay.
You mean the truth?
Hey, why is it bullshit though? Like, actually contend with his argument. I mean, the thing is, people like Tomi, there are a lot of these pretty blonde women that are quote unquote conservatives, and then they start talking about social issues and they really just sound completely indistinguishable from your average liberal. And there's a lot of them out there. Obviously there's Tomi Lahren, but there's also Lauren Chen, there's Lauren Southern, there's Sydney Watson, there's a bunch of them, and they basically are just like liberals on social issues. I mean, and that's all they are. They're liberals that like low taxes and guns and maybe like strong immigration policy, but on social issues, they're just liberals. I mean, they're just liberals. They're no different.
Like I said before, so I believe there we go again. Piers, I'm a woman of virtue. I happen to be independently successful. I have a husband who's not only a former professional athlete, but is currently a professional baseball coach. So is he not a masculine man? I mean, I'm confused here. What's your concept of a masculine man? Mine is...
Yeah, you're missing the point entirely. That's just you personally, Tomi. Like, nobody cares about you personally. We're talking about society as a whole. And also, the fact that you're married to a guy who is very successful and a former athlete and all this stuff, I mean, it just goes to show you that the average woman today is more hypergamous. I mean, do you think that your mother would have behaved that way, Tomi? Just ask yourself that. Like, your mother met your father. Probably they were both average people and they hit it off and they got married and had a kid. They started a family. Whereas you, on the other hand, dated this guy who is a former athlete and very famous. The last guy that she dated, where she was engaged to him and then rejected him after the engagement or whatever, that guy bought her like a fucking $50,000 ring and she rejected him. I mean, that dude was very successful and had a promising political career and she just rejected him. So she's not really dating like average people.
It's a man who respects me.
Yeah, that misses the point, though. Like, you're still not contending with the argument that I'm making.
Your point?
I'm saying inside of society, right this second, right, masculinity is not only punished, but also women on the right, covert feminists on the right, are constantly and consistently talking about how they need to have privilege in society. I want men. Their version of masculinity is men who take care of us, men who protect us, men who do all of this. Those are all duties that men have towards women. Great. What are the duties that women have towards men? What are the duties that women have towards anything? What do men get out of this arrangement? What are we getting out of this arrangement? Can you tell me?
Most men are born to be protectors and providers. I can't imagine my dad saying, you know what, to my mom, you know what, I'm not going to be a protector and a provider unless you do this. That's not how real men operate. Real men are protectors and providers. And
I mean, this is just silly. I mean, people get in relationships because the relationships are mutually beneficial. I mean, men and women are really supposed to complement one another. And yeah, your dad did get with your mom because he got something out of it. He was very physically attracted to your mom. He fell in love with her. She got something out of it. Maybe, he had financial security. He had a good job, etc. Maybe it was physical protection. I don't know. But again, I like how she starts her thing off by just sitting there saying, well, men are just innate that way. They're just born to be protectors and providers. Okay, so are women born to be Yas queening boss babes? Because that's kind of how they are today. It's like, this is just so silly. I mean, no, obviously they're not, but that's what they're being raised to be. Even if the men are born to be protectors and providers, a lot of them are kind of like the long neck guy in the middle, so it's like, obviously we're conditioning them to behave a certain way, and that's wrong, but we're conditioning them more so to be like the long neck guy in the middle than like Andrew Tate. So obviously there's some extremes, of course, but like today the problem is more in the opposite direction, Tomi.
And they marry women who hopefully have some virtue, but also bring a lot to the table as well, that are great mothers, great wives, caretakers of the home. There's nothing wrong with being a traditional wife and mother. you're misunderstanding me if you think that I think that women should just be out doing whatever they want. I think that there are gender roles that should be respected. But I don't think a man needs to get something out of it to be a manly man, a protector, and a provider. If you think you need to get something out of it, I quite frankly don't consider you a real man.
Yeah, so you have nothing. So you have nothing.
But we'll discuss in a moment whether Andrew Wilson is a real man.
Piers, I offer nothing. I offer nothing.
I mean, they don't really have like much of an argument. They just sort of have these kind of stupid little personal insults.
You offer me a lot of things, Tommy. That's why I always love having you on the show. You know that. Let's go to a real man, James Barr.
Thank you. I do see myself as a man, and I know that you'll be looking at me thinking, well, you're not. You're wearing makeup. You're wearing colourful clothes. Like, look at me. I'm really camp. My nails are painted.
They are worrying signs.
You're sat there smoking a cigarette. I'd love to get a vape out and start drinking a beer. Pints with the lads. Just connect with you over that. I think that you have some insane opinions on what women are meant to do for you. It's crazy that you don't appreciate that a woman actually gave birth to you. Like, she gave you a womb for 9 months and then looked after you, I would hope, for the beginning of your life. And you're sat there going, what do women owe men? Women don't owe men anything. No one owes you anything. You have your own life.
Do you understand?
This is just a completely fucking stupid thing to say, dude. I mean, obviously you're talking about toxic masculinity right now. If I were to sit there and say, well, how could you say that when your father took care of you when you were a child and raised you and made you who you are today? Like, that's a meaningless argument to say. I don't care about your father. I don't care about you personally or your father or Andrew's mother. I care about the argument. I care about the point. Like, make an actual fucking argument.
No one owes you anything. You have your own life.
Do you understand that if you make an argument and you say that women are supposed to be
on how to win an argument
in a position, if women are supposed to be in a position of privilege where men do A, B, C, and D for them, and then I ask, well, what duties do women have? And you say, well, nothing.
No one said
right?
that
And then you
men
wonder,
need.
why are men checking out? I don't know why men are checking out. I don't get it.
You just
That's silly, man.
All right,
That's
let me bring
silly
it.
argument.
All right.
Men need to do this. Men need to do that. What I'm talking about is what duties do women have in society? What are the actual women's duties towards men? Everybody is raised from the time they're kids how we're supposed to treat women. We all know how to treat women. We never talk about how men are supposed to be treated. That's almost never discussed, especially by how women are supposed to treat men, what their duties in society are. This has been completely dispelled. Guys like Tate have risen because Christianity itself has become a feminized religion, especially the Protestant sects has become completely feminized. And it didn't used to punish masculinity at all. And now it does. And so where's the alternative? Where's the spiritual alternative? It's nowhere. And we need to get back to this fundamental question of what even is misogyny? Because I don't think that men kicking the crap out of each other, being brutes, insulting each other, hazing each other, even bullying each other is misogyny. Not only do I not think it's misogyny, I think it's perfectly healthy.
Yeah, but I don't think that's misogyny.
Well-adjusted.
Is that the argument?
But that is not misogyny.
Well, no, hang on. How women see this is
misogyny is where you have a hatred or whatever you want to phrase it towards women. It's not about men treating men.
Sorry, toxic masculinity is what I'm referencing here, and toxic masculinity is what they're claiming leads to misogyny. So what I'm talking about is these are all masculine traits. There's nothing wrong with them, right? When you're talking about misogyny itself, I want to know what that even is. Is it just asserting yourself to women, telling women no, telling them no, that's bullshit?
No, I would say it's okay. Let me
telling them
answer
you're
you.
saying stupid things.
Andrew Tate says he's quite open about it. Women should stay at home. They shouldn't go out to work. They should do what he tells them. He's the king of the castle in his house. Blah 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 blah. That is misogyny, isn't it? I've got a daughter. I've got a 13-year-old daughter. I don't want her thinking she can never leave the house. She's somebody's chattel.
It's not never leaving the house. Look, it is true that the world would be a better place if we didn't have it inverted and women did have a natural role at home and that was glorified and that there was government propaganda around the nuclear family and keeping women home. Why do you want to outsource the raising of children to strangers instead of your wife? That's a way better society. Why do you want your best and brightest women forced to go to a workplace instead of the best and brightest women staying at home raising their children? That's a way better system. It's always been a better system.
I guess we're talking freedom of choice.
That's not misogyny.
Women to do anything. To sit there and say to a woman, what do I get out of this woman? That's treating her like an object.
One thing I want to make clear.
Okay, so it's okay to treat men like objects, give them duties, but you're not allowed to give women duties.
I feel respected.
Okay, well, let me ask you this.
I'm not angry about it.
How come it is in the United States that men can be drafted Women can't be drafted, but women can vote to send men to war. 18 years old, they're stabbing each other in the face with bayonets. Women can vote to send men to war that they then themselves do not have to fight. It's a duty that men have, they do not have. What's the counter duty for women? There's no obligation for women to have children, well under replacement rate. It's slated 45% of women will be single in the next 10 years, up to 60% in the next 30. That's the estimates right now. Our replacement rate, we can't even replace our own country's birth rates. That's how low they are.
Maybe
this is what we're seeing as a systemic issue inside of society because nobody will put duties on women.
Go on,
Instead,
James.
you just
Maybe it's men like you that are making that
Maybe
happen.
that's why the
Maybe you're the problem.
rate is low.
Wow, great argument.
Yeah,
It's crazy to me as well that you are just sat here.
Don't talk over each other. Let James speak.
I can't understand why you are sat there confidently thinking of yourself as a victim constantly. You have a platform and you're sat here like, I'm a victim. What are women doing for me? What happened in your childhood that has made you so traumatized as an adult that you cannot stand women succeeding?
Feminine psychoanalysis. Yeah, let's just talk about him personally rather than talk about the argument. Yeah, guys, let's do that. Like, let's not actually like argue the fucking point because we have no fucking argument.
I'm so confused. I feel like the problem is not, and actually maybe this is our fault. Maybe this is the left's fault. Maybe this is modern society's fault for leaving people like you behind. But genuinely, we do not hate men, and toxic masculinity has been thrown around a lot. Ultimately, some of what you're saying is toxic, but that's not because you're a man. That's because you're an idiot.
All right.
Okay. So just to give you a quick rejoinder here, again, didn't contend with a single argument I made. You just said, why are you acting like a victim? While you're here talking about how women are
You're not
victims.
contending with arguments.
It's such a great point, too. They're sitting there claiming that women are victims, but they're downplaying Andrew, arguing potentially that men could be victims. It's kind of funny when you think about it.
It's wild to me. It's so wild to me.
You know, this is Piers' show.
Let me go to Tommy.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all, Piers. I don't think that men should be trained to be overly emotional and that should be a sign now of new maturity, being emotional. I don't agree with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with men crying in certain circumstances. Listen, everybody has a different journey. Everybody has a different set of circumstances. There are circumstances wherein men crying I have no issue with. It's also not up to me to tell a man when he can or cannot cry. I personally prefer the men in my life not to be overly emotional, but that's just a personal preference. Really, who am I to tell a man how he should exhibit his emotions? But again,
it sounds like you'll pass judgment on the man if he does do it in front of you, though, Tommy. So you kind of are judging him. If I were to believe what you're saying, why would it be wrong for me to advise other men to not cry around women, which is basically the kind of thing that Andrew Tate would do?
I think that there is two sides here that are both too extreme. You've got the one hand that wants men to be feminine and cry and show their emotion and be weak. And then you've got the other side that says you cannot cry. You must always be strong and you should look at women as an object. So again, there's got to be a happy medium here. I think there once was, but now because of, again, I agree, there was an overreaction of the feminist movement to make men weak. I don't agree with that either.
Yeah.
But what percentage of men falls into the camp of the treating women like objects thing, though, Tommy, compared to the other stuff that you mentioned? In other words, it's the same fucking question. Do you think men today are more like Andrew, or do you think they're more like long neck guy? They're obviously more like long neck guy, and that's the problem. Not that they're too much like Andrew. Not that Andrew is a toxically masculine person or whatever bullshit. I'm just using him as an example because he's right here.
Wish we could come to a place where there was a happy medium, where people could just be human beings who could have a gender role but weren't married to that gender role in absoluteness. There's got to be a place for that. I would certainly hope.
Yeah. Andrew Wilson, when was the last time you cried?
When I had a death in my family.
And how long ago was that, if you don't mind me asking?
Many years. Many years. I don't know, maybe a decade, something like that.
Right. So you haven't shed a tear in a decade?
I don't think so, no.
Would you see it inherently as a weakness in a man to over-emote?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Men, listen, you don't want men to fall to pieces in crisis. You're the head of a family. You're the head of your household. And also you're the heads of nations. You have a moral obligation not to fall to pieces. In fact, I would say you're duty-bound not to. You need to be able to control your emotions, and you need to be able to attempt to control them at all times. It's not to say that you're not going to lose control. Nobody's perfect. But I think that the idea of the stoic man is a much better prospect for the idea of like this leftist that I'm arguing with next to me on the panel. I would not want to be that guy, that person who just cannot control their internal emotions. They can't do it. And unfortunately, again, this is through the viewpoint of the feminine prism that it's only through empathy, right? Empathy first. And it's like, no, it's not always about empathy. It's also about reason. It's also about logic. It's also about understanding that we live in a carnal world full of warring tribes who are always killing each other. And that's part of the human condition. You can't afford to have your men losing control to emotion or to empathy.
James, when was the last time you didn't cry on a date? Let's flip the question around.
I haven't cried today, but I did cry yesterday, and I think it's okay to cry. And it's funny that you keep trying to goad me and saying that I don't have control of my emotions. I think I have incredible control over my emotions because I know what's upsetting me and when, and I'm able to talk about it.
Well, how often do you cry?
I mean, not all the time, but
every day?
No.
See, so Tomi knows, like, she's watching this and Tomi knows, like, this guy is the result of liberal feminist thinking. You know, the guy in the middle just is the result of that. And she knows it too. But she has to sit there and do the thing where she's just like, yeah, but there's too much on the other side. You can go too far in the extreme in the other direction, though, too, guys. Like, Andrew Tate goes a little bit too far. He said something bad about women once. You know, it's like, bro, obviously, like, the bigger fucking problem is guys like the guy in the middle. I mean, he's the bigger problem, not the toxically masculine men. That's really not that big of a problem. I mean, it's just those guys are relatively rare.
Not every day, Piers. I cried yesterday. I probably haven't cried for about 3 weeks before that. But honestly, my therapist tells me I need to cry, and it's a good relief.
But the point being, Andrew hasn't cried in 10 years.
I think that is such a weakness, Andrew, that you haven't cried in a decade. Like that.
Why is it a weakness? I mean, he just hasn't felt the need to do it. I mean, why would that be considered a weakness?
That's crazy to me.
Told me I could cry.
I'm so worried about you. I can't understand. Well, you're crying now, and please, I happily facilitated that for you.
I think we're seeing the two extremes that Tomi was talking about.
It's honestly, yeah. Tomi would obviously like to go out with a man like you then, because you don't think it's okay for a man to cry.
Well, she has excellent taste.
But there are other women who do like a man that cries.
I mean, obviously, though, I wish they'd asked Tomi that, because she would honestly have to admit that she'd rather go out with somebody like Andrew or Pierce rather than long neck guy. That's just the reality of it. And why do you think that is?
Right. It's like we're not all the same. We don't all require the same type of man. So it's fine if we all want to be different types of men, but there shouldn't be one rule for all men. And that's the problem.
All right, let me bring Sean back in. Well, the instinctive reaction, certainly in the UK, for a long time now, many years, has been to censor and to ban and prohibit and so on. And I think people are beginning to wake up to the downside of that, is that once you give away, once you chip away at things like freedom of speech, freedom of expression, you're heading down a pretty slippery road, which can be dictated by your government. And then that's not a place.
It's interesting though, isn't it? I mean, I just want to make a side point, and I don't need to get into it, but like your government are banning books. So they are literally talking about free speech whilst also banning free speech in it that they don't agree with. So what you're saying is nice, and I agree with you in principle,
from children's libraries is not the same as banning books.
You talked about freedom of speech, right? And everyone coming together and having a discussion about it. But that's not what...
Yeah, but the books that they're banning are like literally porn, though, dude. That's what you're not getting.
What's happening?
Yeah, but we're
putting
talking
graphic
about in the
gay
home,
porn into children's libraries is a little different. James.
I mean, no one should be putting porn into a children's library. I think we all agree on that.
All right, then we all agree. Next topic.
Then why are you complaining that that's being
Because that's
banned?
not what I'm discussing. I'm discussing books that talk about diversity, equality, that talk about Black Lives Matter, that talk about gay pride. Like this is...
So I don't have the same take as the rest of the panel when it comes to the idea of legislating morality. I think that there are ideas which are subversive and that we can get rid of, and that's absolutely fine to do. I don't think that we need to have unfettered access to pornography. I don't think that we need to have unfettered access to children being introduced to this type of sexuality so young. I don't think that that's necessary at all. I don't think it's an impingement on free speech at all. And not only that, there's going to necessarily be limits on every single freedom that we have. By necessity, that's the way it has to be, unfortunately. And the reason it has to be that way is because otherwise you're going to have nothing but subversives who go in and subvert your entire culture, which is exactly what happened in the UK, and it's exactly what's been happening in the United States. So we have to have some way to fight back against that.
I mean, the thing about Tomi, and I know I keep kind of saying the same thing over and over again, I guess I don't know how else to say it, is that she's just a liberal. You know what I mean? She's just basically like on social issues, she's just essentially a liberal. asshole. So, I mean, these kinds of questions where she's asked about, men and women, she really just doesn't have very good answers. I mean, to be honest, I think she sounds like a liberal feminist. It's interesting, like, she's kind of like literally the poster child of the strong, independent woman who don't need no man. She's a successful entrepreneur. She has her own brand. She's very wealthy. She is kind of like literally what feminists think of when they think of that sort of thing. She also just like doesn't seem to get certain things though. And she even brings up like her parents, which is like, it was just innate that my dad is the protector and blah, 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 blah. It's like, yeah, but that was in a world where your dad could walk up to your mom and your mom would respond well. Okay. Like if a guy who was just some average dude, I mean, I'm assuming your dad is just an average guy. If an average guy walked up to you and hit on you, you would be disgusted by it. Like, oh, look, get this thing away from me. You even said it yourself. The guy that you're dating now is a former athlete who's very successful. Your ex-fiance was a very wealthy, successful person as well. Like, obviously you date a certain caliber of men and you do that because you're hypergamous. You're successful. You want someone who's even more successful. And that's just how most women are these days, especially. And that's part of the problem because like Andrew said, whatever it is, half of women are going to be single, 2/3 of women are going to be single in another 30 years, whatever the numbers are. Like, obviously, of course, that is in part because of this kind of way of thinking, but they didn't really touch on hypergamy. They just touched on the toxic masculinity stuff. Hypergamy is probably the bigger problem, to be honest. The 1 out of 10 frat dude, douche bro guys that might hear some Andrew Tate garbage and they might become more of a douchebag frat bro guy. That's not ideal. But again, when you look at the problems in our society, the problem is clearly that we have, men that are more like the guy in the middle, the long neck guy. It's not really the hyper masculine, toxically masculine Andrew Tate fans out there that are, abusing women or doing whatever. That's kind of stupid. The problem isn't the way men are raised. The problem is the way women are raised. The fact of the matter is, like, women are raised to be kind of like Tomi Lahren, which is, again, these very, very hypergamous boss babes. And that's how most women are raised. And they go out there and they only date men that are former athletes that are very wealthy, like Tomi Lahren did. And that's why so many of them are single. And that's why so many of them are unhappy. And that's a huge part of why we have all of these problems. And to be honest, like, if we didn't have that problem, I don't think we would have the toxic masculinity problem, because there would be no need for these men to go towards Andrew Tate or whatever to try to find advice for how they rectify the problem, because they would just have a girlfriend. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this one up. This one was fun.